Hi, everybody. It's Mike from Here the Watchman, and here we are. It is August 19th, a beautiful Wednesday afternoon here in the mountains of Idaho. And we're coming at you. Listen, I want to ask you guys, please hit the subscribe button and then click the bell so you know when we're posting a video. I get a lot of emails. When are you posting videos? I post them every single day now. Subscribe and click that bell. Also, want to let you know, we're going to have with us today Derek Gilbert from SKYWATCH TV. You all know him. Derek, thanks for joining us.
Mike, it's my honor. Always enjoyed talking with you.
Derek, you're a busy man right now. We have coming up the Defender Conference. It's an online conference, folks, and I'm going to let Derek tell you how to get there. But also, real soon here, Labor Day weekend, Derek and I, and Derek, Sharon, Jeannie, myself, Coach Dave, his wife, Mike Spalding, his wife, Jamie Walden, his wife, Tim Alberino and his kids, and Robert Griswold, David Paxton. We're all going to be at the Warrior Summit, which is not a conference. It's a camp, a fellowship camp. If you want to get involved in that, though, you need to get involved right now. The cutoff for registration is this week. There's a little wiggle room on there, but hey, it's filling up. We only have room for 175 people, and right now I think there's 160. So, get busy and make that reservation. Derek, you looking forward to that?
Yeah, I am. One of the things that we miss is Sharon and I are homebodies, as you know, but we do enjoy traveling to conferences because it gives us an opportunity to meet and talk with people, and we missed that this year. So we're looking forward to a chance to actually see people face to face. We unlike many people, like our daughter, she's 30, she's still still very social. She and her friends like to go out and have a good time and hang with friends and whatnot. So for them, this lockdown has just been, oh, when are we finally going to get out of the house without a mask? And, for us, it's like we have to stay home.
Yeah. Jeannie and I are exactly the same way. And when I work in the studio, it's just me. I mean, it's just me alone. And so it's been no big deal for me.
Right. And, and we're that way too. I mean, Sharon gets up early and she writes for a couple hours before I get up, and then she goes to bed early, and I write and research for a couple hours at night, after she goes to bed. Both of us are the kind of people who spend a lot of time inside our own heads. So the lockdown has not been bad for us in that regard. And I acknowledge that we're probably more blessed than most, because here in the Ozarks, we just have not had the impact of the disease that many other places have. But even with that, I think here, just generally speaking, in rural America, people have more common sense, and I think you'd agree with this, than in big cities. Both of us are big city kids. I was raised in Chicago. You from Southern California, LA, and so we can compare and contrast with some experience. And I would much rather be where we are now in small town rural America than back in any one of the big cities across the country right now.
Amen. When Jeannie and I are going to drive to Jamie's camp in High Hill, Missouri from here, and spend some time on the road, and I was looking at the map and I'm like, holy moly, man, we're going to be staying in some big cities, and along the way, and like Omaha and St. Louis, for a night. And it's like, I am so used to rural mountain life now that I already get anxiety looking at going through one of those big cities. But it's going to be fun. And listen, folks, you'll want to go to omegadynamics.org. Go on there, you'll see everything about the camp. The price is all inclusive. It includes all the activities: canoeing, fishing, swimming, hiking, the little seminars that we're going to put on. And Jamie's got a paintball thing set up where we can all go out and shoot each other. So, it's really something special. Take a look, but get on board, and get on board now. And then, Derek, before that, I think it's the weekend before that, you have the Defender online conference. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that launches next week, Thursday, August 27th, 2020. And unlike other conferences that will stream out one video at a time, we're because we're a small ministry and I am the de facto IT department here, we've decided to make it as simple as possible for us, but trying it differently just to see how this works as well. And we're going to launch it like one of the online streaming services launching a full season of a new show at once. So when it launches at 2 p.m. on August 27th, that's 2 p.m. Central Time. So wherever you are in the world, just, we're UTC -5. So 2 p.m. Central, 3 p.m. Eastern, New Pacific. We're going to release the entire conference at one shot. And this will be like 45 different videos, because not only does it include all of the speakers for this year's conference, it will we're including and packaging with this all of the video presentations from the 2019 conference as well, which means you get like 4 presentations from Dr. Michael Heiser. You'll get 2 from me, 2 from Sharon, 3 from Josh Peck, because of last year's conference being bundled in with this. And of course, you'll get to see Mike and Jeannie as well, because Mike and Jeannie were the hosts of last year's Defender Conference. All of those shot on location in Branson at the Radisson. This year, of course, the hotel, which would have been the Chateau on the Lake, not able to accommodate 2,000 people. And that's something that we're running into with many of the conferences this year. So, but the speakers for this year who were not part of last year's conference include Pat Boone, Steve Quayle, Gary Stearman, and others. Of course, we've got some folks who were there last year who will be contributing again this year. Pastor Carl Gallups, Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis, Dr. Michael Lake. Carl Tykrib will be one of this year's speakers. He was not at last year's conference. Also, our good friend Messianic Rabbi Zev Porat will be has contributed a presentation. So there are, and of course, one of the new members of the SKYWATCH TV crew, that's Drew Graffia, the radical Christian, talking about his book, The Warrior Priest Mindset. So some new speakers. Steve Quayle, boy, he's got a mind-blowing presentation that I was honored to be on the recording side of. Steve doesn't like doing PowerPoint, but I guess he feels comfortable talking with me. So it was sort of an interview, but I let Steve do almost all the talking, which is what people would rather hear anyway. But he's got some information from an insider on the Vatican and our alien, put that in air quotes, alien saviors. So between that and then Tom Horn's presentation, where he shares the vision that he had of the incoming asteroid Apophis. This is tied to his book, The Wormwood Prophecy. You get some mind-blowing stuff there. And then in my presentation, we'll show, again, the high-definition drone footage of the Serpent Mound of Bashan, the ancient kingdom of Bashan, Og of Bashan. There is a geological feature there that will blow your mind, and it's only just been recognized here in the last few years. I'd like to take credit for it, but our friend Doug Van Dorn, who's a pastor in the Colorado Springs area, or Denver area rather, he actually wrote about it in his book, Giants, Sons of the Gods, about 7 years ago. So he actually gets credit for finding it, but we just happen to have a friend in Israel with a drone that shoots in full HD. So we've got drone footage to show you the dolmens and the burial cairns of this 6,000-year-old site that has been overlooked by archaeologists to this day. So a lot of cool stuff at the Defender Conference, and it's all the speakers and presentation titles are now posted at defenderconference.com.
Awesome. So folks, get out there, defenderconference.com, get signed up. And be enriched by all the speakers and everything that they have to offer. So Derek, on today's show, what we'd like to talk about is, everything with COVID and what's going on in Israel, and how does that all tie into prophecy? I mean, what is your read on all of that? Let's start with the COVID thing, and what is your read on that?
That's one of the interesting things this year that, when we saw this beginning to develop back in January and February, and Sharon was very perceptive on this. She keeps her eyes open for reports of emerging diseases around the world. She's been doing this for decades. And when she started seeing the information coming out of China, she said, this is something we got to watch. Now, back in 2014, you might remember the West African Ebola outbreak, which killed over 11,000 people, the worst Ebola outbreak in history. That was unusual, which many of us in America didn't really understand, because until that outbreak on the west coast of Africa, it had never really broken out outside of Central Africa, Congo. So this was really a strange occurrence, and there were cases that showed up in other parts of the world because the world is so interconnected now by air travel. Tom Horn asked her to write a book back then in 2014, which he published, Ebola and the Fourth Horseman of the Apocalypse. He wanted another book about what we're seeing with the coronavirus pandemic, and that will be coming out in November. But we kind of made it more of an evergreen title. It's not focused specifically on the pandemic, because our position is that the rider on the pale horse, who represents death, or Thanatos in the Greek pantheon, we believe that he's been riding, that all of the riders of the apocalypse have been riding since the first century. After Jesus was called up to heaven, we believe God released them to ride. And we make that case in the forthcoming book, which is called Giants, Gods, and Dragons. But what we're seeing with the response to this pandemic is a pattern of what will lead up to the arrival of Antichrist. We don't think this is the rider on the pale horse any more than the Spanish flu of 100 years ago, or any less, for that matter, because again, we believe this rider has been out there for 2,000 years along with his fellow horsemen. But the reaction to it and the panic that we've seen around the world, even after it became more and more apparent that this was not as bad as the experts first projected, is the type of reaction we will see that will lead to the arrival of the Antichrist. And to that end, the World Economic Forum is actually taking this as an opportunity, in the best tradition of former Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel's belief that you should never let a good crisis go to waste. They are looking at this as the opportunity for what they're calling the Great Reset. This is something that you may have heard the term. Watch for it to increase, the use of this from influential people around the world as we get closer to the end of the year, because the World Economic Forum plans to roll out its plan for the Great Reset in January. It was announced by the one who coined the term, who's the founder of the World Economic Forum, and I'm going to forget his last name now. Klaus is his first name, and I'm going to forget his last name. Sharon's got the book, and she's been reading this and really studying up on it. But essentially, the plan is to use fear over the pandemic, and then once the pandemic passes, then to use climate change to bring that back out of the closet as the boogeyman, to scare us into welcoming a new global government and more global control over our lives at the local level. We may see, and I believe this is one of the reasons why there's such a push for 5G technology, because they need all of us to be interconnected to high-speed internet so that they can track our data, quantify the data, calculate the data, and use that to, in their minds, most efficiently manage our lives at the micro level. A fellow by the name of Patrick Wood has been writing about this and warning about this for a long time. He's got a book that's several years old now, but it's highly recommended, called Technocracy Rising. Technocracy Rising. The first part of the book is a history of the technocracy movement, which goes back to the 1930s. And it's this idea that only engineers and scientists can really tell us how we're supposed to live and properly manage our civilization. And so we need to turn over all control to them. And what do they need? They need lots and lots of data so they can see who needs what, where, and when. And then we just let them do all of that so that our lives are properly managed, because you and I are too stupid to properly use the resources that we have access to. So we need to let them do it. But what's really helpful about Patrick's approach to this topic is that the final chapters of the book show how this fits into end times Bible prophecy. This is all about a return to a one world government, a return to Babel specifically, and with Nimrod being a type, a foreshadowing of the one world leader that will emerge in the last days. Now, do we think that COVID-19 and the climate crisis are going to lead to that specifically? No, because if you read Revelation chapters 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, there's a lot of stuff to get through before the man of sin, the Antichrist, arises. But it's going to look a lot like what we're seeing right now. And the work that the World Economic Forum is doing is laying the infrastructure for this man. Because not only do they want to control the kind of the amount and the kind of energy that we use, and watch for something called carbon currency, which is, again, something that Patrick Wood writes about a lot. It's not a new concept, but the idea is that we each have so many carbon credits allocated to us that we can use in whatever way, to heat our house, to drive to work, to produce food, whatever. Watch for that, but also the global currency. And this is something the World Economic Forum is also pushing. We're seeing central banks getting on board with this idea of developing central bank-backed cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum, except backed by the Federal Reserve Bank or the Bank of England or the European Central Bank, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because they've realized suddenly that this distributed network, distributed currency like Bitcoin is outside their control, and they can't have that. So these are the things that are moving us in that direction. But until we start seeing the things like Tom Horn writes about in the Wormwood Prophecy, you know, burning mountain falling from into the sea or into the rivers or whatever, once we start seeing catastrophes like that, that's when we watch for the man of sin. Now, we don't think, being pre-tribulational, Sharon and I don't think we're going to be here when things get that bad, but we don't know for sure. God is called the Lord of armies, you know, Lord of hosts, many, many times, a couple hundred times in the Old Testament, and it's for a reason. And he's not going to divulge his plans to the enemy for the end game until they see it unfold on the battlefield in front of them at Armageddon. So we will understand things better in the rearview mirror. But I think right now the message for us as Christians is to watch what's happening, take note, and say, you know, the apostles and the prophets of 2,000, 2,500 years ago, they saw all of this coming. Let me show you where this is. And now this doesn't mean we're supposed to be afraid, because when Jesus said, you see all of these things happening that look awful, hey, look up, because your redemption is drawing close.
Yeah, amen. Well said, Derek. And you know, it's insidious what's going on. I mean, you look at, Tom Horn the other day wrote about the Journal of American Medicine, talking about how if you won't take the vaccine, you should be basically banned from working. You should not be allowed to have a job, you know. So there's a little hint. Mandate. We have the word mandate that has become something in the English language here in America that everybody's familiar with. Mandate. So in other words, the government's going to tell me that I should wear a mask because they don't trust that I'm adult enough to stay away from people and not go near people who are at risk, that they need to control it. And you look at, I mean, to make it real simple, Five Guys, the burger place, has gone cashless. You can only use a credit or debit card there now. So these are all things that we should be watching and paying attention to as we continue to walk down through these times. And I love it. You know, it's almost like, has the rider on the pale horse, is he coming to town or not? I mean, you got to watch, and you got to be paying attention to know that. Now, moving to a different topic, if we can, Israel, the Treaty of Israel. Now, some people are saying, here it is, we're dividing the land, you know, Trump's responsible, it's his fault. Well, everything in America is Trump's fault, according to the
Yeah.
I mean, we had a planned power outage at 4 a.m. this morning, and I forgot about it. And at like, I don't know, I get up really early to go work out. So at like 3:55, I got out of bed and I was just kind of messing around. I went to put my coffee on, and all of a sudden the power went off. And I'm like, oh yeah. Well, of course that was Trump's fault, you know, I mean, but we look at what's going on with the treaty. And what I'd like to do, if you could break it down, is what is the treaty and what does it really mean to us as Christians?
Yeah. Essentially, it's just a normalization of relations between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, which are the 7 wealthy emirates that are allied with one another around Abu Dhabi, you know, Dubai. These are the 2 largest economies in the Gulf region, Israel and the UAE. this sort of normalizes or just makes official a relationship that's been ongoing under the table for a while, sort of like the Saudis with their relationship with Israel. They communicate through back channels, but officially they don't. Mohammed bin Salman would like to make things a little more formal, but he's got to watch out because he's got the Wahhabist Sunni Muslims in his nation there inside his borders that have caused problems for the ruling family in years past. One of the things we forget about Saudi Arabia, by the way, and this is just a quick observation, is that how it's called Saudi Arabia because it's ruled by the ruling house of Saud. It would be like calling the United States Trumpy America, until 1922 or whenever the House of Saud was sort of blessed by the Western nations, Britain and so forth, to take over Arabia. It was simply Arabia. And there are a lot of factions inside Arabia that don't like the House of Saud. So the UAE, unlike the Saudis, unlike Jordan, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, its other Arab neighbors, the UAE has never been at war with Israel. So this nation, and it is, as far as the Sunni Muslim nations go, even Turkey now, since Turkey is moving back in a more Islamist direction, the UAE is probably the most, shall we say, open of the Sunni Muslim nations. So the relationship with Israel has already been sort of relaxed compared to its other neighbors. So what this really does, yes, it did require the Israelis to agree to suspend its announced plan to annex Judea and Samaria, what the world calls the West Bank. And there are some who are unhappy about that. But there are others, including a friend of ours who lives in Samaria, who was not really happy about the so-called deal of the century as it was defined, because his particular community would have been one of those that was isolated on the map. So right now, for him to go to Jerusalem, which he does frequently, and many of his neighbors commute to Jerusalem to work, it's about a 20 to 30-minute drive. Once the deal of the century had gone into effect, the way the map was drawn, the road between Jerusalem and his community north of there would have been closed to Jews. So they would have had to go down past Jericho to the Jordan Valley, drive north in the Jordan Valley, and then come up through a corridor open specifically for their community. So it would have turned it to an hour-and-a-half drive. So they were not really thrilled about that. As it is, Israel has de facto sovereignty over the West Bank, Judea and Samaria anyway. I think ultimately Israel winds up getting sovereignty over all of it. But what this does, though, by the UAE acknowledging Israel's right to exist and establishing formal diplomatic relations, is it further isolates the Palestinians. Because the Palestinians, yes, they want a state, but ultimately they want to push Israel into the sea. They want all of Israel. They don't just want Judea and Samaria. So now you've got the wealthiest Sunni Muslim nation on earth, wealthier than the Saudis, saying, yeah, we're full diplomatic relations. We will open phone communications. We will send direct flights there. And there are reportedly already Israelis who are talking about taking summer vacations to Dubai. So I think it's a good thing for Israel. It will bring more money into the Israeli economy. And from the standpoint of the UAE, it gives them access to Israel's defense industry. Israel makes a lot of weapons that they sell, and the UAE is looking at them as a potential supplier to help arm them against the growing threat of Iran. So Sunnis and Shias hate each other more than they hate Jews, Christians, and Hindus. So ultimately, there may be other nations in the Gulf that wind up following suit. Apparently, they're already talking to Sudan and Oman about establishing relations with Israel. Palestinians not going to be happy about that. I can see why there are some who not thrilled about the suspension of sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, but I think in the long term, it's a win for Israel.
Well, Derek, I mean, why do you think it is that Christians get so bent out of shape when things like this happen? I got into it with a couple of people in a discussion, and they were trying to tell me, no, this is the separation, this is it, it's biblical. And I was like, well, I mean, I could agree with you, but then all three of us would be wrong. That's not what it is, I mean, but why do you think, as Christians in today's environment, they're so enticing to put their arms around that?
Well, it's a good question. I think we've sort of been conditioned for 50 or 60 years to look for prophetic fulfillment in the newspaper headlines. And so sometimes we miss the forest for the trees. The fact is, Israel does have de facto sovereignty over most of Judea and Samaria as it is. Having been there a couple of times now, that doesn't make me an expert, but I will say that we never felt like there was any place that was completely off limits to us. There were areas where you didn't want to go because it wasn't safe. But when you go to St. Louis or Chicago, there are places you don't go because it's not safe. And this was before, the protests began at the end of May. I mean, I grew up in Chicago, and we knew as a kid, you didn't go south of this street, you didn't go east of that street because it just wasn't safe. So more people get shot in Chicago in any given weekend than will be shot in Israel over the course of an entire year. That's just a fact. That is not an exaggeration. So, for us to look in from our high horse in the West and say, how dare they do that? Well, maybe we should talk to a few more people who actually live there and hear what they have to say. It's also, and again, this is anecdotal evidence, I suppose, but from friends in Israel, they hear from friends of theirs, Arab friends of theirs who live in Judea and Samaria, who would prefer to live under the Israeli government than under the Palestinian Authority, simply because they realize the Palestinian Authority is hopelessly corrupt, that it exists primarily right now to enrich Mahmoud Abbas and his family. And they would, for all of the issues that Israel has and the squabbling within the country, as our friend Avi Lipkin says, the reason they have, the joke is that the reason they have elections in Israel is to see who's going to have to make a deal with the ultra-Orthodox parties to run the country. The Arabs who live inside the borders of Israel understand that they're better off than they would be under a Palestinian government.
Yeah, that's very true. Well, listen, Derek, I want to thank you for taking time away from Skywatch TV there and spending it here on our little show and enlightening people. I mean, folks, you want to use some discernment, and you want to spend time researching the facts on your own. They are not contained in the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, or any mainstream media. So spend some time and dig into it. Tune in to Derek's shows on Skywatch TV, does 5 and 10, I believe it's called, every day. Check that out. Keep yourself in the know, and avail yourself of their upcoming Defender Conference. And that's just, how do they get to that? DefenderConference.com?
That's correct, DefenderConference.com.
Get there. Well, listen, Derek, we're looking forward to seeing you here in the very near future in High Hill, Missouri at Jamie's camp. Folks, go to hearthewatchmen.com. You can see everything we're doing. We'll be talking about a online conference that we have coming up in September here in a couple of weeks. So God bless each and every one of you. God bless you, Derek and Sharon, and everybody at Skywatch, the Skywatch TV team, for all you guys do.
Well, thank you, Mike. Honored to be here. And again, say hi to Jamie, of course. Look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.
All right, we'll see you there. Well, listen, folks, that wraps it up for today, Wednesday, August 19th, the Watchman's Report. Thanks for joining us. Remember to subscribe to the channel, and also remember there's absolutely nothing that you can't do with Jesus in your heart, except nothing at all. Get out there and get busy, and we'll see you next time here on the Watchman's Report.